Today we'll be painting Anne the Nun from Zombicide with a twist. Today I'll be painting as precisely as possible.
That the entirety of the cosmos is accessible to each and every individual's mind, connecting to the great mind, the great spirit.
What collectors, welcome back to the channel. Alright, so today we'll be painting Anne from Zombicide. So this is the Ultimate Survival series where she has more non-metallic metal, and I'm looking at the model and I'm thinking I think I can be more precise because she has probably 2-3 types of materials. Just silver and just a black cloth, easy peasy. So are you ready? Let us begin. Alright, welcome back to another video. So in today's Painter in 90 challenge, I'll be painting Anne the Nun from Zombicide. Alright, so the twist for today's challenge would be that I will be controlling my brush strokes a lot more precisely. As you can see in the previous Painter in 90 videos, I tend to use a big brush and just slap on some colors and I'll refine the shapes after. So I'm thinking, what if I go with a more precise approach to make sure that every highlight is accurate so that I can save some time or clean up later. So I'm going in with the methodology that slow is smooth and smooth is fast to see whether this will speed up my painting or not. Okay, if given some time, I would be also trying to focus a little bit more on the face, and because the face is really nicely sculpted on Anne, I want to make sure that Anne's face really stands out in the crowd. Alright, so I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the colors which I'm going to use to paint the habit. I'm using black, dark sea blue from Vallejo Model Color, Fuel Blue from Vallejo Model Color, Flesh Tone from Joe Saunier, and Ivory from Vallejo Model Color. Okay, so the first color is a mix of black and dark sea blue, and I'm just using this to start placing some highlights because the colors are not going to be very different from the black base coat. So what I'm going to do is, at this stage, I'm just going to be really expressive and messy. Okay, but after this will come the neatness. Okay, I've switched to a smaller brush already, and now as you can see, I'm making very precise highlights. So there are many fellow painters who ask me, like, how do you know where to highlight and what the size of the highlight is? I would say that as a guide, you can put the miniature under the light and you can see where the light is shining, where the reflection is, and that serves as a guide to the size of highlight and the distribution of colors. But of course, because we are painting a miniature and we want to express different information regarding the miniature, like what material the model, say for example the habit is made of, it will vary between glossy and matte surfaces and satin surfaces. So so those are the challenges which you would face when illustrating the color and the distribution on miniatures. Okay, as you guys can see, I'm making sure that the shapes are very accurate. This type of shape is very heavily taught and inspired by Kasha. You might know Kasha as a really crazy freehand painter, but the basis of her shape is that the highlights tend to gather on the edges and it is less distributed as it fades away from the edges. So I'm using this ideology to place the highlights on the habit.
So my approach to the habit would be that because it's a satin finish, it's going to have a distribution of more midtones, and the highlights are going to be a very small percentage of it. So as you can see, I'm proceeding onto the highlights, and you can see that the highlights are occupying very small areas, very small and controlled areas. So I would usually differentiate the midtones to the highlights by the difference of me whether I added Vallejo model color ivory or not. Once I added ivory, I would consider that a highlight. Other than that, anything before that would be considered a midtone in my own opinion. And I find it very useful to organize your colors in terms of shadows, midtones, and highlights. So because this is satin, it has more of the midtone color, the blue color will show a lot more. And as you can see, I'm spending a lot of time on the habit. Usually I would have been done by now. And this is a result of the process of me trying to become even more careful to try to show more definition while painting fast. I would say that I'm employing this trick where I dab on the highlight and then I jump back to the previous few blue color to blend it back in. I find that it's a very effective way of highlighting, because the method of highlighting usually that I do is that I just go layer by layer by layer. But in this method, I realized that if I wanted to blend the highlights down, I would just slap on some highlight color and go back down. I find that this is very useful. However, I do find that it's not as useful for me progressing from the shadows towards the midtone. So these are my little bits of finding. So now heading on to the silver armor. It's done using a bit of raw umber and a few blue to create this base color. So as you can see in this process, I try to dry the model a lot more compared to my previous methods in the other videos. In the other videos, I tended to just paint even when the model is wet, but now I try to dry so that the lines are a lot more refined and they continue to serve the purpose of illustrating the shape, rather than just being like very blended and very ill-formed. Alright. So as I mentioned before, the distribution between gloss surfaces and satin surfaces, they are different because the distribution where satin surfaces have more midtone and glossy surfaces tend towards highlight, and they tend to be a little bit less saturated in the highlights. Okay, so how I'm approaching the swords is the same way as the armor. I'm painting them as the same material, but as you can see, the top surface is entirely coated in one color to make sure that the values continuously stay higher than the bottom side. I'll be painting Anne using an orange underglow, and I find that this orange underglow tends to help to frame the entire miniature very nicely, because let's face it, the entire Anne miniature, it's either metal or black, and both are very cool colors. And because I'm painting her as a Caucasian woman, the skin tones tend to be very cool also. So you would need a bit of warm color in the surroundings to frame the entire miniature. If not, the entire miniature will look, in my opinion, a little bit boring and a little bit monotonous. Yes, that's the word, monotonous. you want to put some contrast into the color composition, so that you can bring out the areas where you want miniatures, where you want the miniature to stand out the most. Alright, so gradually adding ivory into the mix. I've now realized that Vallejo model color ivory is a little warm. I'm going to be searching for a off-white color that's neutral in nature, so that we can adequately paint cool colors. So if you have any recommendations of that color, basically something that's just not too cool, not too warm, but not pure white. So I'm looking for something like that, so that I can avoid using pure white too early. Of course, we can always add white and black together to create this off-white, but of course, because we are always speed painting, we want to make sure that the colors are readily available, so that we can paint as fast as possible. So I'm using this stippling and then scratchy technique, which I've seen this painter called Jero Miniatures use a lot. So if you want to check him out, you can go check him out on Instagram. His handle is JERO Miniatures. He always uses this scratchy textury technique, which I've also illustrated right here on the top right corner on the dog painting video, the dog fur painting video. While it says dog fur, I tend to use this method for many materials, and I can also use it to illustrate scratchy metals right here. Okay, so a brief overview of how I do it is I use a wet brush to block on the rough shape, and I'll dry the brush and use this very dry and sharp tip. I'll start to scratch the surface so that it forms a very interesting and rough texture, which is very pleasing to the viewer, because it looks like it adds a lot more detail to an otherwise flat and mundane surface. So we're almost halfway through our challenge. I distinctly remember when I was painting Anne, I realized that I was in trouble, because Anne had the same problems as Samson the dwarf, because there are so many metal surfaces, there's so many things to paint, and there's not enough time. And I honestly thought that I'm going to breeze through Anne, because I thought that I was going to have a lot more time, but no. Halfway through the miniature, and I realized like I'm in trouble. I think this is a very common occurrence for me, because in many of my Painter in 90 Speed Paint challenge, I realized that I think this is going to be easy, but in reality, when I was painting the miniature, halfway through the challenge, usually I'll be like, oh shit, and I'm always thinking of my time allocation to see how I can speed up the process. So right here I've used raw umber mixed in with a bit of chimera orange, and I'm starting to place in the glow. In my previous videos, you guys have always seen me putting in the shadow color first. Today I'm doing it slightly differently, in a more controlled fashion. As I mentioned that today's video is about control. So there are no washes, there are no slaps of color. It's just pure control to make sure that I spend as little time as possible during cleanup. In my most humble opinion, I find that this method can serve me faster than the previous method, because in the previous method I spent a lot of time moving back and forth, but then in this method I realized that I can progress pretty quickly. The downside to this is that you will need to have a very clear image in your mind, and you will need to be very familiar with the colors that you are using, so that you can paint them as quickly as possible. So I would say that one thing that really motivates me to paint faster in doing these challenges is the completion. So right now I'm putting in the gold trim for the armor. Anyway, back to the topic. What about completion? Sometimes I tend to not paint an entire color to completion because it really irks me that some colors are not base coated, and then I can't have a good grasp of the balance of the entire miniature. And so I say, for example, I can't leave the face not base coated because I would really much rather have the face base coated, and it serves a purpose for me to be able to balance the entire composition of the miniature, so that I know whether I can push the highlights brighter or leave it as such. I think this is a very good tip that during the challenge I learned that the entire miniature needs to be painted together to make sure that the entire composition is coherent. I think if you guys are constantly watching these videos, I've always been stressing on the word coherency. Okay, so basically coherency, to recap for those who are new, coherency is about having each component of the miniature sing the same song about the lighting situation. So as I mentioned, in this series I'm painting the heroes liberating a village which is being burned down by zombies. In the chaos, there's always some orange light, so this orange light will be reflected in all their armor, and when you put them all together, they tend to sing a coherent story. And this kind of coherence, not just within the model but within 6 models, is something that I'm striving to achieve. And you can see how I'm doing it by using a very limited palette. And yeah, so right now I'm highlighting the gold. As you guys can see, the gold is framing the armor very nicely already, but it also says that I have 28 minutes in this challenge remaining, which means I'm in deep trouble. So I'm just getting everything well defined first before I can spend the time on the face without feeling guilty that I left anything apart. Okay, so now the gold is shining very nicely, and very obviously the face is not done, and I hope that I'm going to work on the face now because I remembered being in a lot of trouble. And yes, as you guys can see, I'm starting to contour the face. So this face color, I wanted shadow colors to be a bit more red and more berserker like, because this nun is gonna be a berserker. Okay, so I've used red oxide, raw umber and flesh tone to create this shadow color, and then I'm starting to place the volumes onto the face. So things to take note: you want to make sure that the volumes on the face is well painted. These volumes are the things that you should take note: the forehead, the brows, the cheeks, the nose, and the bottom and the chin. For the nose, I like to pay particular attention to the nostrils, where I will shadow the side of the nostrils only to make sure that the nose is immediately readable to the viewer. And I'm also going to be shadowing under the nose to create sort of like a little cast shadow. Okay, so now I'm using a very dark color. I'm using red oxide and black to fill in the mouth and paint in the lipstick color. And I'm gonna add red into the previous flesh tone mix, focusing on the cheeks, focusing on the tip of the nose, to give Anne a little bit of blood vessels. As you guys can see, the face is starting to be a lot more readable. I like to make sure that the eyes are well lined too. Okay, I'm painting in her teeth. So this is a tip for all you guys. Do not use white for the eyes, do not use white for the teeth, because it just doesn't make sense. White is the color, or rather it's not a color, but it is the paint that has the highest value. So painting the teeth white and painting the eyes white would mean that the eyes and the teeth are literally glowing light, which doesn't make sense at all. So please don't do that. How I paint the eyes and how I paint the teeth, I use the Josonia basic skin tone, and I find that that value suits this the most. I've seen a lot of painters use white for the eyes and teeth, and I sometimes just crutch my hair and say a little sorry to the miniature. Alright, so if you want to understand values a little bit more, you can check out the video on the top right hand corner right now. The links will be in the show notes. Okay. And now, using almost pure white, I'm starting to scratch in the highlights for the silver bits. As you guys can see, now with 12 minutes on the clock, time is getting very scarce, and I'm highlighting the main areas. So as I said, I tend to highlight and go back to the previous color to just blend it down. As you guys can see, it's a pretty effective technique in my own humble opinion. And now I'm pushing the highlights on the top surfaces of the armor with very little time to spare. So I'm just pushing the surfaces so that they are more readable. As you can see, I'm not putting a lot of attention on the lower parts because they are in the shadow. I like these 90-minute challenges because everything works out well, and my Canon G7X Mark II has a battery life of about 90 minutes, so it also serves as a reminder of when I should stop. Alright, so just almost finishing up the miniature now. If you are watching all the way to here, I thank you. I'm adding a bit of yellow to push some reflected light, and that will be the last stage of this miniature painting. I hope you enjoyed this talk through about changing my processes, and I encourage you to try to paint a miniature a day for 90 minutes because it allows you to experiment and try something new. I find that this has made me a better miniature painter, and I'm more aware of my capabilities and my thought processes. As you can see, with 5 minutes on the clock, I'm still desperately trying to improve on the face. I'm using the same tips that I spoke before, making sure that every single component on the miniature is readable as possible within the given time. And in just a little bit, I'll be showing you the finished product. Just making sure everything is highlighted, readable, barely. And I hope you enjoyed your time here. Thanks for staying, collectors. See you soon for the final product. Alright, so this is Anne finished. I really like how she's done, and she finishes off my first week of painted in 90 minutes with 6 Zombicide characters finished and a necromantic dragon painted in 3 hours. I'm very happy with the result, and I'm pushing on to the second week. I hope you join me for the second week, and yep, we enjoyed the video too.
As you can see, I totally underestimated how to paint Anne because same problem with Samson. the surfaces require a lot of time and precision to make the shapes look as correct as possible. So it was a real challenge to finish Anne, but I'm really happy to have finished her today. So how do you think? She's my last Zombicide hero, and I finished all 6 of the Zombicide heroes from the Black Plague series. You can see the pictures right here. They look amazing together, right? So for 1 hour and 30 minutes each day, you just have to put in the time, and at the end of the week, you have a fully painted set of heroes. How awesome is that? I encourage every single painter to give this a try and see what you guys turn out. I really find that doing this challenge really helps me improve as a painter, because it gives me a lot of time to think, gives me a lot of time to experiment also. Okay, how do you find this video content? Let me know in the comments below. If you found that it was good and you think I deserve it, please like, please subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon and all that other stuff. I post videos almost every day, so you don't want to miss out. Okay, if you can afford it, please head on to the Patreon, links in the show notes. Okay, head on to the Patreon, $2 Patreon. You guys get extended footage for many of my videos, so that you guys can scrutinize every single brushstroke I do. And if you can afford it even further, become a higher tier patron and get exclusive content, blah blah blah, all that other stuff. Alright, I'd like to thank my patrons for allowing me to do this, and I hope to see you in the next Painted in 90 Minute Challenge. See you guys.